lot to cover and a lot that we are hoping will come out of this webinar. So welcome to everyone to this emergency Ukrainian Refugee UK Summit, and thanks to everyone for joining us at short notice, particularly the speakers and facilitators. My name is David Altshuler. I'm a founding member of One-to-One Children's Fund, RTI, now known as UMNA, and also JRAN. JRAN is your host today. It's JRAN is all about sharing knowledge and experience in this refugee sector, seeking the best ways of addressing the key challenges that refugees are facing. Of course, hearing their voices as much as we can, and then coordinating our efforts to have maximum impact. I'm delighted to introduce our forum co-host today, Anna Jones, who's been part of the initiative to pull all this together. Anna is co-founder of RefuAid, who've been doing such great work in the refugee space over these past 7 years. And I think we both started in this new wave, in helping this new wave in Greece on the island 7 years ago, Anna. So over to you, Anna, for a short
thank you, and thank you, David, for pulling us all together. So I met with David, I think about 2 weeks ago now, just because RefuAid had spent some time out in Warsaw. We'd actually gone out there before the Homes for Ukraine scheme was launched, but we're over there whilst it was launched. And it was very obvious to us very quickly that nobody on the ground, at least in Warsaw and through partners throughout the rest of Poland, was aware of the scheme. They weren't even aware of family reunion, the changes that had been made to the family visas. And so we felt there was a huge gap in kind of awareness of schemes that were available. So we spent some time working with two particular organisations who we've now partnered with. And then on the flip side, in the UK, we've been approached, so we've been part of a business consortium of employers who are all willing to provide time and resource in order to help people become employable. So they are offering jobs, but crucially, more than that, they're offering a lot of resource to help get people into work. And I think one thing that struck me in Poland was how key that was to people. Even though they fled very recently, people were considering where they could get job opportunities and work. And linguistically, we met a number of people who didn't speak Polish, but did speak English. And so it served them to come to the UK and to know the mechanisms that they had available to them to do that. But the questions that we've been presented with in the past 2 weeks of helping people apply for the Homes for Ukraine scheme have changed our view of the support the programme needs. So a lot of navigating of who's doing what in the sector has happened, and it's become apparent that we don't know all of the moving parts, and it would be great, I think, to get the sector working a little bit more together, or at least aware. I know because everyone's trying to chase their tails and catch up with how things are changing. So I met with David, and as he said, we've had a lot of support from Ed Davies, very passionate about pushing this forward, and we're just keen to facilitate this workshop to identify these key areas and work together on finding key problems and solutions together.
Right, thanks, Anna. So we're going to be covering all the issues around matching, visa application, controls and safeguarding, all in the context of the wonderful outpouring of empathy and hospitality by so many people in the UK. Unfortunately, the challenges go deeper than the processing of visas and provision of accommodation and services. And the vast majority of this unprecedented wave of Ukrainian refugees are women, children, and the elderly, traumatized by fleeing a terrible war zone, stuck in limbo and uncertainty, with loved ones left behind at great risk and danger. So it can't be reasonable or morally acceptable for them now to endure our bureaucracy instead of our hospitality. A few weeks ago, in the aftermath of the terrible bombing of the theater in Mariupol, I spoke to Leonid, a psychological first aid coordinator at a local NGO called Proliska. Leonid was organizing every possible kind of first aids, supplying urgent medical equipment, as well as providing food and shelter to displaced families in the region. And one of the things he said really stayed with me. He said, we're pretending to feel we have control while providing help to others. And this goes, for me, this goes to the heart of addressing trauma and everything I've personally witnessed working in post-conflict zones and refugee camps. It's the sense of self, the sense of who we are as people, as professionals, as carers, as family members, that's so important to retain in the face of uncertainty and chaos. And whilst what we are sharing together in this forum shines a light on the issues facing all refugees in the UK. In fact, we believe that the outcomes from this forum should not be limited to this crisis, but will have relevance for many other asylum-related issues, including the integration of Afghan refugees, which was the subject of our last JRAN forum. So with that little intro, I would like to introduce the first of our keynote speakers, Bishop Kenneth. Bishop Kenneth is the Bishop of the Ukrainian Catholic Church in London. He was born in Canada and has served in ministries both in Canada and the Ukraine, where in the 90s he served as Vice Chancellor and Chief of Staff to the head of the Catholic Church and the Archbishop of Lviv in Ukraine. He then founded and served as president of Caritas Ukraine, which will come as a nice surprise to many people who are working with Caritas at the moment through various partner organizations. And he then founded and served, after Caritas, he went back to Canada and ultimately resulted in his appointment as Bishop in London. And Bishop Kenneth is leading on the Ukrainian response in the UK, and he's establishing a welcome center and an info hub for Ukrainian refugees at that magnificent church of his in Duke Street, just below Selfridges, if those who know the West End will know it as a landmark. So we look forward, Bishop, to joining you and helping you in your endeavors in your church, or it's not in the church itself, it's associated with your church. So over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much, everyone who's attending this very important workshop. As David has mentioned, and I think we've realized that since the invasion and the people fleeing harm's way, both finding themselves internally displaced people and then also those who have left the country to the borderland countries of Poland, Moldova, Romania, Slovakia, and Hungary, that the majority of these people certainly will be young women with children, and their husbands will have been left behind in Ukraine to be defenders. The other thing that we will be seeing, of course, is that they will have endured a lot of tragedy, both just enduring the departure from their homes, especially in eastern Ukraine to western Ukraine, and then over the border. A week and a half ago, I met with a young woman who on the 24th of March, 24th of February, woke up and saw what was happening. Her parents were working, as many Ukrainians tend to be doing now in Western Europe. And she said, "What should I do, Dad?" And he said, "Go to the bank, withdraw all of your money, put some gas in the car, and drive what would have been normally 6 hours to the Polish border." It took her 4.5 days because of all of the check stops and then the long lineup at the Polish-Ukrainian border. She recounts that when she was in the lineup, that the amount of people of goodwill that were providing them with water, with sandwiches, this type of thing, until they got to the border was just spectacular. At the Ukrainian border, she said the Ukrainian border guards were wonderful to her, and the Polish border guards were just spectacular. And then she said once she got through all of that, she was met by volunteers who offered her a hot meal, asked her if she needed anything. And I kept thinking, I hope that when we are welcoming people here, that they have that same good story, if we can say that, on their arrival to the United Kingdom. As was pointed out, the bureaucracy is very challenging for people. I can only imagine how challenging that bureaucracy is if you're a young woman who may not know English very well, and you have 2 little children and maybe a cell phone, and you're trying to navigate all of that. However, I also think that the challenge is going to be, and we're constantly getting information from people of all sorts of areas of not only of London, but throughout the United Kingdom, as to how they can help, how they can provide housing, how they can, what can they do? And we were fielding all of these phone calls from our very small staff at our cathedral here in London. And we realized that we need to be more systematic, that clearly this is not something that's just 1 week and then it'll all go away. And so along with different NGOs and faith-based communities and private sector, we've been developing this information hub that will be a place where people can call to receive help or signposting them to where they can receive help, and to signpost or assist people who want to offer their assistance, and also to try and work out the political situation, to make an analysis of what the government regulations are, so that we can provide that information in a timely, accurate manner. However, having said that, that's the bureaucracy. What about a welcome center for those who have arrived? It's still unclear what they will need completely, but we don't want to duplicate what is already being offered by other NGOs or government organizations. We maybe want to fill a niche that has to do with things that are specific, that over the next months and maybe even year that Ukrainian displaced people will find themselves into, including the hosts may find themselves in challenging situations where, because of language or cultural barriers, they may not be understanding those people that they're hosting, that they could come and talk to someone who could assist them. I think the other thing that we have to be looking at is the vast majority that are probably going to be arriving are Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens or ethnic Russians, and they certainly are clearly people who didn't see themselves being needed to be liberated by the Kremlin armed forces. And so I think we also have to make sure that the religious background of people, if they have one, and if they don't have one, also be sensitive to that, to their ethnic backgrounds and to their language backgrounds. And so in our Welcome Center, we, although it is being located in the premises of our cathedral on Duke Street and Wayhouse Street, we have separate entrances, and definitely want to make it a place that everyone, regardless of their ethnic or religious ethnic background or religious affiliation, if any, would feel welcome. And so I think one of the things that's been very essential as we move forward is, first of all, cooperation with various NGOs and people who are already doing things. We don't see ourselves as doing matching sponsorships. I think there are Reset and other organizations that will do that better than us. But I think it's important that we reach out. We have a large Ukrainian community here in London. Not all of them are religious, but I think that most people are seeing that our cathedral is sort of like home base for many Ukrainians. And so having that in mind, we want to offer our facility to be that home base for people who have been displaced, but also for people who are helping. And I think that's about all I would have to say at this point.
Thank you very much. And Enver's also here. So Enver Solomon is the CEO of Refugee Council, who are known throughout the UK for their support and advocacy around asylum and migration issues, and is here to share the Refugee Council's UK response to the Homes for Ukraine and the war itself. Enver?
Thanks very much. It's great to be here. It's great to hear from Bishop Kenneth. Actually, one of the things we've done with Bishop Kenneth's teams and the Ukrainian Association of Great Britain is because we have a pro bono relationship with McKinsey. McKinsey have put in a project management team to make that Welcome Centre a reality. So it's brilliant that we've been able to make that connection and direct that pro bono support in that way. I'll briefly mention some of the things we're doing at the Refugee Council. Then I just want to flag some of the key issues and challenges I see with where things are at, and then talk about how we can maximise coordination. So at the Refugee Council, there's a number of things we're doing. Firstly, we're being commissioned already by local authorities to provide wraparound support. That's the funding that's going to local authorities, £10,500 per Ukrainian refugee that comes in on the Homes for Ukrainian scheme into a local authority area. Each local authority gets that tariff and will be either providing wraparound support or commissioning organisations like mine to do it. We're being commissioned where we operate in London, in Hertfordshire around there, in the east of England, and then up in Yorkshire and Humberside. And that work will be around orientation, around support to access benefits, support to access education, mitigating issues that might be emerging vis-a-vis the host to avoid host relationships from breaking down, and supporting the individual to begin to integrate, access employment, all the kind of standard resettlement package, but a resettlement integration light piece. We've been doing it with Afghans in hotels, and it would be slightly different for Ukrainians as well. The second thing we're doing is we recognise that there's a gap in provision for those that are coming through the family visa scheme. They're not entitled to any formal state support in the sense the expectation is the family's there to support them, but we know that many people are not able to stay with families. Some are being referred to host organisations such as Refugees at Home. So we're going to be providing casework support, wraparound support to those Ukrainians that want it as well. And an overall piece, we're going to be stepping up and increasing our therapeutic support. We recognise that, as has already been touched on, there'll be a great deal of trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, other mental health and wellbeing needs that we will look to respond to, because that psychosocial piece, i.e. enabling the psychological elements to be supported in order to address the social needs, the two for us are very integrated and go hand in hand. And then we're also going to be looking at developing a small scale capacity building grants program for community organisations that are working with the Ukrainians. We've been doing that with Afghan community organisations, and we'll be looking to do that with Ukrainian organisations as well. And then we're obviously involved in the advocacy and engagement piece, working very closely with DLUC around a core delivery group that they've set up that Citizens Reset and others are involved in as well. I think some of the challenges that we see, firstly, the visa application process is a huge challenge. I mean, everyone will have read the stories. I think it's particularly disheartening where you hear Ukrainians saying they're giving up on trying to reach the UK because of the complexity of the barriers involved in the application process. And I think there's a real need for that to be addressed by government, and I think they are going to be trying to look at it. Our view is that using a standard visa system in response to a humanitarian crisis is just not essentially fit for purpose, and there should be an emergency or humanitarian visa scheme that's bespoke to respond to this, to the need, would be far more fit for purpose. I think, as I mentioned on the family scheme, the fact that people, are not able to stay with families, it's happening already, and recognizing the gap in support for them is a real issue. We're talking to government around that because local authorities are already having to pick up the pieces there. They're already reporting people presenting homelessness, being in priority need homelessness, and they're not resourced to meet that need. So that is an absolute gap there. I think on the Homes for Ukrainian scheme, I think that it's remarkable. I think we should just pause and just recognize the remarkable response from the British public here on a scale that we haven't seen in recent times. The fact that 200,000 have offered to host, and then if you multiply that by the many other people that have offered to support hosts, I was reading about a whole community in the Chilterns where in that village there are only 2 or 3 people offering to host, but there's another 60 odd people that are offering to welcome and support and be that circle of support. Is an extraordinary response, and we absolutely have to harness that in the right way, and that means ensuring that hosts are adequately supported. It means that there is the support there for Ukrainians, particularly support around health needs. Every Afghan that came in the summer last year was guaranteed a health check, was guaranteed a GP to go onto a GP books, and at that time was guaranteed a vaccination for COVID. We need that similar level of basic health guarantee. There was also a guarantee to ensure that their children were given a school place. We need that guarantee as well. I don't think we can just leave it to the system to meet that need without there being an expectation from government that that is the minimum provision from health and education services. I think the pathway beyond the host arrangement is key. The initial sign-up is 6 months, but what happens then, and thinking about those pathways, they'll be different. There won't be one single pathway, but if it is into the private rented sector, onto universal credit, the housing benefit element of universal credit, how do you smooth that transition? I think around the matching piece, there are already conversations which are really positive happening around how we look at accreditation. I think ensuring that local authorities consistently provide that wraparound support will be important. Many will step up and want to, not least because of the public focus on the issue, but some won't, and how we get consistent support in place so it isn't a postcode lottery. And then I think finally how we all coordinate and join up. I've been particularly struck by the multiplicity of things that are happening and people that want to engage. And it's always a challenge at times like this to coordinate. And I think you have to do it across different sectors. So there's obviously a join up vis-a-vis local authorities, and I see that's been put in the chat already, and how the civil society connects with that. And that partnership is going to be so critical. There's obviously a whole bit of join up around, private sector organisations that want to engage, separately around civil society, and then the interface with government. And DLUC is doing some of that in quite an effective way. But there are multiplicity of networks. There's the Good Practice Hub that the other charity Refugee Action operates. There's other networks that exist on the local level. If you just take the Yorkshire and Humberside region, there's a whole voluntary sector network there that operates under the migration partnership run by all the local authorities. There's a similar migration partnership in London that has a voluntary sector interface as well. So it's complicated to get the coordination, but I think we have to use the current structures as best as we can rather than to replicate them. And then finally, on a positive note, I think the prize here is enormous. Actually, if we can all make this work by, saying to government, this is where the gaps are, this is where you need to think about, but harnessing the huge potential of the British public to come forward, recognising those potential challenges and trying to mitigate them in advance. The prize is enormous in that tens of thousands of Ukrainians come to the UK, they have a positive experience, they rebuild their lives. Those that want to stay successfully integrate, those that want to be able one day to go back in the way that people did return to the Balkans after the atrocities and the huge and the scale of destruction there, you know, a few decades ago, are able to return. That prize is enormous, and I think we all have a role to play in ensuring that that is the outcome. But let's not kid ourselves, it's not going to be easy, and if we all lean in a positive way, I think we can help make this work.
Great. Thanks so much, Enver. You've covered a lot of ground there in preparation for the workshops. Maggie and Sam, thank you for your offers to update on the role of local authorities and also on the latest guidance on host checks. Sam, please take that into your workshops, and we'll get the benefit of that in the feedback later. This is all about connecting all the dots. As Enver said, there's so much great work going on. Our next speaker is Tim Finch, and Tim is perfect to follow now, because Tim was involved in the setting up of the community sponsorship scheme for refugees when coordinating the National Refugee Welcome Board. And so Tim knows, I think, how to harness all this empathy, or certainly I'd love his input on this. And he also founded the communications agency IMEX and is a consultant to Citizens UK and also a trustee of Reset. So Tim, over to you. Give us an overview of how you see things.
I hasten to add, I didn't set up the community sponsorship scheme on my own. There's an awful lot of people on this call who were involved in it as well. So,
well, you're involved.
Team effort. Yeah. I just starting. I mean, I was asked about challenges, and I think, you know, obviously one of the big challenges that we face is the third refugee crisis we've had in a few years, and the third brand new and very different response that the government has decided to put in place, and it is a massive challenge to, in effect, create a entirely new system of refugee resettlement and refugee protection from scratch after the war has started and the refugees have started fleeing. And I think, you know, a challenge for further down the line, once hopefully, God willing, this conflict ends and things settle down a bit, will be to try and make sure that we don't do this again. That we as Enver says, there's an opportunity to get a great prize out of this and get finally a system of refugee protection in this country that commands confidence from all the partners in it and is fit for purpose. And one of the things we need to do is, you know, it's a horrible phrase, I know, but not waste this crisis for thinking about the longer term. But hey ho, we are where we are, and the spirit within citizens, and indeed I think everybody now involved in this, is one of positivity and leaning in and really engaging. So and I think my general message here is one of optimism. I think that after a slightly rocky start, I think there was a sense that this was so daunting it might just fall over almost before it began. There's now a tremendously good spirit among all legs of society, and this has to be a whole of society approach to make this work. And I think one of the things we shouldn't forget here is where it's standardly said, and it's not untrue, of course, that that this has been a remarkable response by the people of Great Britain, with the 200 registrations of interest, and that's converting into Reset. I think as of the weekend, and it's surely grown already, have had 8,000 households actually register to be hosts. So moving from perhaps a rather vague emotional register of interest to a firm commitment to do it. And there's now 7,000 Ukrainians registered. Citizens is doing its own thing alongside the Reset pathway. Lots of other organisations are doing. So there are very, very firm offers. So that bit is there, and that bit is very acknowledged. I'm not usually a defender of the government on these sorts of things, but I think we ought to give them a bit of a round of applause as well, because although I criticised the system at the beginning, this is an amazingly generous system. It is unlimited number of places. There's no targets, there's no caps, there's no assessment of whether someone's genuine or not. There's no asylum process slowing it down. So that is something that anybody who's been calling for the government to have a better response to refugees has to acknowledge that that is a very, very positive thing. And that's one of the reasons why I think sort of piling through the door, now the government has put it ajar, is by far the best strategy. Just very briefly, though, on some challenges. I mean, I think the main issue that's going to face us, and already is how do we match up the offers of help with the people who need that help at decent speed with sufficient safeguards. Those really are quite difficult issues to deal with, and in some ways they're difficult to reconcile. Speed, safety, and I think the third one, sustainability. How do we ensure that when people arrive in a safe place and are housed there, that relationship can continue for at least the 6 months, perhaps even a bit longer than that, are really important considerations. And that's where, you know, the work that Reset in particular doing, but other people who are looking at how do you match up Ukrainians who don't know British people and British people who don't know Ukrainians, is so absolutely vital, because as well as the safety element, you know, making sure that nasty or criminal people don't exploit the system, there is just this thing: are people going to get on? You know, are they going to be? They're living under the same roof. How are they going to get on? And that's why I think we will have breakdowns, and why Render's quite right. We need a system for working out how that will help. And it's great that the local authorities are really piling in, because there will be no, you know, that without them it won't be possible. But I think there is a very key challenge to fully mobilise this upsurge of public sentiment. And there, I think this is where my sort of final point really would be to say, this is where you trust the community. You trust the experts who are experts in their community, not experts in resettling refugees, but who know their communities well and who want to be part of those welcome groups that Enver was talking about in Buckinghamshire, and they're springing up all over the place. That is the major lesson we have found from community sponsorship, that this can be done by a volunteer army. It's just to make the thing you need to do is to mobilize them, support them, train them, and empower them. And if you can do those things, a lot of the problems that we'll be talking about here will be mitigated, because it won't be, which I think we will all be worried by, a lot of individual hosts supporting a lot of individual guests, and nobody having real visibility over that, and not enough support being offered. And I'll finish there.
Tim, thanks so much. The point you ended on is something that's been occupying our minds as well right from the beginning, and one of our workshop facilitators, Deanna Jukovic, has given a lot of thought to running webinars for those who are at the front line and for hosts themselves. And maybe we'll hear a bit more from Deanne when he feeds back from his group later. So now we're going to move into the workshops. And if you haven't been to a JRAN forum before, this is how it works. But the key point is that each one of us, there were 60 odd people on this in this forum. Everyone is a voice of an organization and has real knowledge of what's happening on the ground. And each one of us is integral to the outcomes and recommendations that we reach at this forum. So we're going to break into 5 different workshops covering all aspects of the issues that we're addressing and that we have the overview on. Each workshop identifies the array of challenges that they face and focuses on the 3 highest priorities, coming up with the best ways of tackling them and how best to try and address them, and how best we can do it together. And the representatives of each workshop will then come back, form a panel, report back on their findings to this full forum in about 45 minutes time, when we have a chance to ask questions and pull together the findings into an agreed set of recommendations and joint actions that we can take together. We can take to government, we can take to local authorities, we can take to each, and most importantly, we can share amongst each other. So thanks for that first session, Michael, our technical Guru is going to magically take you into breakout rooms. I hope that works well. And we'll see you back after the breakout sessions. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good breakout. Where we're going to go now is that we're going to hear from each breakout room. And we have 5 workshops, and one person has been designated in each workshop to feed back. Then we'll have a Q&A that everyone can participate in. Even if you weren't in that workshop, you can ask questions to the workshop facilitators. And so let's kick off. Let's get going. I hope everyone has had an opportunity for a comfort break. If not, let me know. And if you think you need 2 or 3 minutes, we can have a quick break now. Would that be good? Show of hands. Everyone okay? All right. So workshop 1, who's facilitating back from that? That's matching, safeguarding visa applications. Is that Monica, or Monica, have you designated someone else?
I think that might be me, because I think Monica basically, I had to do notes on that, so I'll summarize kind of what we discussed briefly. So hi, I'm Sam, I'm from 2 Generations, doing various matching and safeguarding checks on behalf of councils and post move-in sort of vetting and mediation and all sorts of other things to help this be as successful as possible. The things we talked about, so there are 3 broad themes. One is refugee focus. So a lot of what's come is the result of lots of people offering support, and basically effectively we need to keep focused that this is about the refugees and their needs. In particular, the UK isn't necessarily the most attractive place. The visa process is difficult. We're far from Ukraine. Travel by the EU is difficult, and the actual process itself can be quite traumatic. So really, just being mindful of that. The breakdowns are going to be inevitable in some of these. We've got a lot of people doing things directly and enthusiastically without necessarily realizing what they're signing up for, and there is stuff happening on this to, for example, kite marking systems to help people match. But when breakdowns happen, is that there isn't at the moment a complaint system or a way of managing that. People may need legal clarity on the responsibilities in the event of a breakdown, and what that looks like, and what happens, about rematching, particularly if you have a breakdown before arrival. You've had some early instances where matching people have discovered that properties the landlord didn't give permission before they arrived, for example, and suddenly these people are coming into the country. That's likely to be less of a problem because systems are getting better and more robust, but nonetheless, these are things to be concerned about. And the final thing is about people and the scale of the challenge. So we are ramping up massively. Another council that was on the call is ramping up massively, and it's how you find the right people to do this. So whether you're doing matching that's got a lot of technology based. I mean, we've got Nesta award winning stuff, but we don't do it for refugees. Reset have done a huge thing, but ultimately you need a person to look at this because it's about human beings living together, and there's only so much technology can tell you. So it's about how do you find the right people that that will make sure that it is a safe home with the least chance of breakdown. And those are sort of some of the big challenges. As many questions as there are actual answers and clarity, but a good discussion I felt nonetheless.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sam. Moving on to Rachel at workshop 2.
Thank you. Yeah, we spent quite a lot of time talking about local authorities and the responsibility that they've been given, and it seems to have been moving around quite a lot. But we realised that there's one of the massive challenges for local authorities, and there are many. They're under a huge amount of pressure. Is that the slow speed at which they're receiving information and data. So in terms of how many people are going to be coming into my borough or your local authority, is all of this is very, very slow. So that's a challenge, and there's any way that government can be pushed to process that more quickly. And then the other question is around the funding that local authorities are going to receive. So that £10,500 per individual refugee. At this point, I don't think it's known how that money is to be spent, and if within that 10,500, does that also have to include the money for example, school provision? And so I think clarity on that for local authorities is something to absolutely ask for if we're going to be pushing back to government about these things. We then really, as a group of people who are all working with communities who want to support, we talked a lot about how do we coordinate, because we all know probably a few things about a lot of things, but we all know different things, and we don't, as has been said on this call a few times, we don't want to reinvent the wheel the whole time. We concluded that it is worth every small group, faith group, whoever you are, groups of volunteers, to get in touch with the local authority to say who is the person responsible for the Ukrainian resettlement scheme, so that those relationships can be built both ways. So that the group, for example, we're a community sponsorship group in South East London who want to support hosts. We need to have a relationship with that local authority, and they need to know also that we exist. So that was one thought, make that contact. Representatives from the boroughs of sanctuary, I mean, obviously fantastic, already established groups of people who know what they're doing. They are also, if you know of one locally, to contact them, because they are people who have expertise and have been doing this for some time. We also advocated that if you are people who just want to host and you don't know where to find your community sponsorship group or others who know, to get in touch with Sponsor Refugees. They're the project within Citizens UK who Tim Finch is working with, who spoke at the beginning, because they know about local volunteers. And I should add, and I didn't mention this in the breakout room, but one of the schemes, the campaigns that citizens are launching, is to find institutions, big institutions, dioceses, universities, established institutions who've got staff time where they can appoint a coordinator to do all of this work of bringing small groups together. They're called strategic partners. So if any of you represent an organisation, to talk again to Tim Finch about becoming a strategic partner, because I think that addresses a number of the questions that were coming up in our room. And finally, there's a great need for a centralised resource, a database of sorts, which those of us who live all over the UK can go into online and find out what is available in our locality, who else is doing what I'm doing that I can get advice from, who are the I mean, as a sponsor, it would be who are the Ukrainian speaking GPs, for example, all of those details. How do I find that online? And we know that it's a huge ask, and at the same time, it isn't impossible. So wondering how we can agitate and make connection with businesses, AI, just tech experts who can facilitate that happening. So we just see that as something that for years has been needed and is going to be needed for years to come.
Rachel, that was great. A lot to think about and a lot to take into the Q&A and then into pulling things together. So let's hear next from the trauma psychological first aid group. Deanne, are you going to be reporting back, or is it Jenny or Gabriella?
I would like maybe Jenny or Gabriella, whoever.
Deanna, you're not up for it? Or who took the notes?
I think Jenny is trying to.
Oh, Jenny, you're on mute. Jenny, you need to unmute.
Deanne, I was hoping that, I thought we talked about it. I think it would be brilliant if you could.
Let me just introduce you briefly. Deanne has worked closely with us in the Balkans, training local people, but he's to become counsellors, but also has worked extensively in the last few years, or certainly I think 2014 to 17 in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbas region. So he's really been in the thick of it there, building the capacity of local resources. So you come to it from a very interesting place, Deanne.
Okay, thank you. But I come from Croatia, not Ukraine. We had a very good discussion in our group, and there are a few things that I would like to highlight, and I think it came from Gabriela. One of the pillars of our work in this area of the psychological trauma and well-being is actually that we need to be aware and work with the organizations and individuals, including hosts, about the individual issue, identity issues that are important in making the refugees welcome, and also making the relations between the hosts and the refugees work. There are many similarities among them, but then there are also differences, and the issues are how to deal with that with appreciation and how to resolve the disappointments as well. Another point that was brought up is the need for trauma-informed care, both in organizations and also in the individual work. Because we are dealing with people who've been traumatized and with all the after effects that we can expect, and anticipate that for most of the people, the things are going to improve once they feel safe and settled. But then there will be some 20%, maybe 25% of those who will need more follow-up and care, not necessarily specialist assessment or diagnostic assessment and then therapy, but there must be a provision for them to be recognized and then referred to the next level of help. That is something that the hosts should also become aware of, and to know how to cope with effective dysregulation, whether it's hyper or hypo, including physiological regulation and emotional states. And then the third thing that was brought up is, again, as it was mentioned in one of the other groups, that is the coordination. Because obviously there's a huge demand on one side of this kind of services and support, call it support rather than services, and the limited capacity, of course. So it should be, we should be very creative of how to reach out to the many people who are in distress, try and help them normalize that feelings as well, but also support those who need more in this aspect. There were several things brought up which are perhaps more fitting into the safeguarding issue, and that is the safeguarding of the benefit of children who may be exposed to disciplining practices that are not acceptable in our countries, using physical force and punishment in a way that's unacceptable. We also can expect that there may be increase in domestic violence in the circumstances that we are seeing. So this may be the highlights, but please do add Jenny and Gabriela.
Right. Gabriela, anything to add? Jenny shaking her head?
I think that was a very comprehensive overview. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on seamlessly to the next breakout room, which was welcoming the refugees and briefing of hosts. So is it Arish of Refugees at Home?
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Arish from Refugees at Home. So we spoke about what we do at Refugees at Home. Historically, we have been hosting refugees from across the globe, from Africa, from Syria, from Eritrea, from anywhere, from Afghanistan. And now we have referrals for people from Ukraine, obviously. So what we do is we have a host application. Every host has to be vetted with a professional home visitor, and that home visitor actually is there to support the host throughout the placement. So say a guest is going to stay there for 6 months, the host can call on the home visitor anytime they have a problem or a concern, and they can also reach the placement team at Refugees at Home. So there is this support already in place for the hosts. There were talk about the wrap-up support for the guests because the placement team does not have capacity to support the guests as well with registering with GP, schools, all these well-being support that they need. Most recently, we have been trying to work with RefuAid, Refugee Council, and Reunite Families, where they can refer guests to us and we can place the guest with the host, and then they take on that support of the guest, family or individuals. There were talks about shared hosting. Obviously, this is a long time commitment. Like when you ask one person to host a family for 6 months, this is a lot. So we were just trying to think, how can we support the host? Can we maybe move the family to another host nearby, just to share the responsibility? But there was a voice against it because of course of the children, and that they need that stability and not to be taken out of their familiar places, playgrounds or school, or so that might not happen actually. We have talked about, so at Refugees at Home, currently we're hosting people who have already arrived in the UK via family visa. And we have started doing the matching for the sponsorship program. We feel very confident about this because we know the hosts, they're vetted, we know they're good people who wants to help. So we have a guest application. We match them with the host who we think suitable, and then ask the host to apply for the visa. And once the guest arrives, then the home visitor and us and the wrap-up support from other organizations will be there for the host and the guest. And as has been mentioned already on here, we spoke about compiling a list of support for all of us, like a centralized, as you were saying, ritual. It's really needed. So it'd be good to think, how can we actually make that happen as frontliners, so we can work together. I think that's about it, but if anyone wants to jump in from the call to add anything that I missed, you're very welcome.
Yeah, there was just, because we were all scribbling notes, so if it's okay just to add a couple of other things.
Sure.
It was a great group, which was wonderful, with lots of echoes of things. I think there was a fantastic bit around from Kate about family support and family therapy support, and how we look at different stages probably of sort of the initial welcome, and then review points along the way as to when the families, both the guests and the host, might need additional support, and how that is kind of gauged and also mapped to local resources. I think there was a whole bit around mapping, actually, beyond the actual signposting of what resources there are locally and where to go. There was a concern that in some areas there's probably loads of support and loads of community organisations and everything else, which is wonderful, but then we will have the host dotted around everywhere who maybe can't tap into that. And so that's something we probably need to identify quite quickly. And do we support those people online, or how do we bring in support around those families? There was quite a lot of talk about the different types of support from community organisations, local businesses, etc., that we can put around the host of kind of wider support. And I think citizens have got models. On safeguarding, we also touched on that a little bit, and possibly to look at the local volunteering organisations that were active during COVID. Also, Home Start have good models around the when you need a DBS, when you don't, what other I'm a Home Start volunteer, and I think there's some really interesting stuff in the work they do of specific one-to-one support, but then also wider support things that people can tap into as well, both as volunteers and also as the people benefiting from the services. There was also talk about day centres and the way synagogues and different faith groups are looking at structuring this locally. So the multi-faith forums also have a key role locally to play of where there could be mental health support at one place, sort of resources, different resources at another, etc. And I think something that we all touched on, and I know this is about Ukraine, but is that how do we support everybody else that's here? We have huge refugee communities in our boroughs, some of them living in very difficult situations for the long term in hotels, and that we mustn't forget about them, and we must look at how we support them alongside. It's a huge ask, but we really need to be doing that too. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm aware that I think Maggie, are you still here? Maggie, I know your input must have been incorporated in the feedback that we received from Rachel, but is there anything you want to add before you leave? Because it's quite, I mean, this seems to be a real key part of the puzzle for us all, is the connection with local authorities and how we connect. And do you have a coordinator that relates to all of us and all that kind of, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just added the guidance for local authorities, which is publicly available, and I would suggest that everybody has a read through. I see you've got a Councillor Sarah Conway on there. She'll be well familiar with that, but I think that's probably the first thing to do, so that you can see what their responsibilities are in terms of accommodation, safeguarding checks, wraparound services, obviously DBS checks likewise, and a lot of local authorities are now looking at move-on options for after the 6 months and in cases where relationships fail. We've had the local authorities network meeting earlier today, and the recording will be available. So as soon as that's available, I will find a way. I think it's Dave that David, it's you that perhaps I'm communicating with. I will send that just so that you can see what the kind of issues are and what local authorities are grappling with. But I think the main message is that if you are providing services, do make your local authority aware, because they are trying to put together welcome packs to complement the national welcome guide for access to local services. And in many cases, that includes a kind of key person to contact for hosts. A lot of local authorities are commissioning hosting organizations, such as some that we have heard from today, to do some training for hosts and information sessions. That is really important. It's a real gap that exists. Hopefully that leaves you with some things to think about, but the guidance really, I would have a look at it so that you can see what the statutory responsibilities are for local authorities, and there is a long list.
Okay, just one to push you on one point. Is there a central coordinating point for us different organizations working in different ways to coordinate with the local authority? No.
In the local authority, they probably will be, but I wouldn't say nationally a central point.
Okay.
No.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. And we have one more workshop to hear from, and that's Anna at RefuAid, who's going to take us through language, education, employment, and then Anna is going to facilitate the Q&A.
Yeah, and just to add to Maggie's point, I don't know if she's left us yet, but that could be one of our asks. I think that's come out of almost every workshop that we're seeing is some sort of national coordination from local authority point of view would be amazing.
Well, we do have the network, and so I would encourage every local authority to get in touch with the City of Sanctuary Local Authority network. It's growing, and it's really useful, so do come to us.
Amazing. So we looked at language, employment and education, quite a lot of the focus on employment. So from our side, I think one of the key challenges that was presented is the understanding of language, education and employment opportunities in the UK for people prior to arrival. So we are today looking at 2 women withdrawing from the Home scheme off their own back because they don't feel that they've got secure employment opportunities, and they're quite far along in an interview process. But that's really been fueled by the cost of living in the UK and a lack of kind of having somebody on the end of the phone to discuss that with, or an organisation. So they've been dealing directly with an employer, and a third-party organisation has been needed to come in there, which we are now. And I think that's one of the drivers of people's kind of trepidation around employment, language and education in the UK, is cost of living in neighbouring countries to Ukraine is relatively low versus being high in the UK, and rumours circulate around destitution. The next challenge we looked at was the kind of hard and soft skills that our employers are expecting of those going into employment, and what support could be provided there. So people having CVs translated, skills around wider UK sector awareness, the state of play of certain sectors within the UK, and interview processes within companies. An additional challenge was retention of staff. So if, as we're seeing, corporates overwhelmingly offer multiple job opportunities, retaining those staff in those jobs and making sure they are meaningful roles. So commensurate with people's skills and experience, and roles that people want to and provide meaningful employment. On the language and education, we touched upon a similar to Maggie's point, which is what I was trying to hold on to, is a ESOL coordination on a national level. So for many people, ESOL coordination relies on local authority contacts, which if you're a referrer that works nationwide is incredibly daunting to have ESOL contacts at every local authority. So a potential solution there is to look at whether there's scope for any kind of wider nationwide ESOL coordination in the UK, and again, awareness for those arriving of what services are available to them. There is funding being allocated per head, and ESOL is supposed to be part of that. So I think navigating for people and providing resources and where they can access it. One of the additional challenges we looked at for people studying is those who fled midway through a degree or a qualification that they need to go into employment in the UK. So I mentioned that we're in the very, very early stages of talking to UCAS about whether there's any kind of module credits that can be applied, but it's an incredibly complex task from the university side, and it won't change anytime soon. So whether there's something that can be done looking from the employer side at kind of apprenticeships, internships and grad schemes, and a blend of all three. So I think Cam from NIA is going to pick up on that. Those that inevitably won't be work ready in the next 6 months, so those who will need a lot more of support to get back into employment and education, and how that's being factored into the Move On plan. I think what comes out of all of this is an increased need for coordination. Hosting services need to coordinate with those working in employment, language and education to ensure that where possible, people can move into independent accommodation and living at the end of that 6 months, if at all feasible. And if not, what is that safety net? What does it look like for them? A very practical challenge was digital inclusion, so hardware and connectivity. And I think connecting up organisations providing that. And then just one last one, David, sorry, I know clock watching, but a convener for all of those. So a convener of employers, we're dealing with a number of employers who are looking for resources, whether it's around recruiting in the UK or recruiting remotely, and whether we can provide support, a unified package of support from those working on refugee employment, such as resources around remote recruitment, hiring, retention, etc. And just to add, what came out from everyone that's very positive to hold on to is that every employer we have spoken to in the last month who's come to us, including the NHS and some big employers, has said that whilst Ukraine has been a massive driver of them wanting to offer job roles and look at it, none of them have said that their roles are specifically, and the support they're providing is specifically for those fleeing Ukraine. They have all made it very clear to us that whatever they're putting in place and whatever support's being provided is for all those who have fled war and persecution, which has been a refreshing kind of statement from those in the private sector. So that's the kind of challenges we touched on. If there's anything I've forgotten from those who are part of the workshop, please do interject.
I doubt that. It sounded very comprehensive, Anna. So let's open up for questions. I don't know if you want to put the questions in the chat or show show your hand, and we'll try and pick it up.
I don't know if I can see people's hands, so maybe the chat might be a...
Or just to go off mute, Anna, and blurt.
Yeah, shout at us.
Well,
Yeah.
while people, can I blurt? While people are thinking, what strikes me is there's also an issue about, I wonder whether organizations representing particular professional groups like lawyers, doctors like the BMA, British Psychological Society, etc., would be prepared to offer particular support and help in thinking about re-registration. I mean,
yeah, so they are, and I think we were on the legal core, and the RDDG is the Refugee Doctors and Dentists Liaison Group as well last week. And I think, yes, and this is what we're finding, kind of one of the solutions that I think is coming out of multiple workshops, is there's a wealth of very good support being provided, and the lack and kind of the gap is that navigation piece and that convening piece. And we did talk in our workshop about actually finding a third-party convener, because, you know, speaking as RefuAid, the reason why we're here is we don't have the resource to bring all this together. So finding that third-party convener who can do that, and who can essentially kind of network almost between organizations to make sure that that there's no gaps and people aren't falling through those cracks. Because, you know, the BMA are doing a lot. The GMC have changed a part of their language requirement just overnight, which means there may be doctors who can requalify a lot quicker, but it's getting that message out there, and that's where we're coming up with that barrier.
Right. Any other questions?
So Tamara's come through with what kinds of organizations are able to provide training for hosts and how do hosts access it. So I think that's probably best placed either with Reset or Refugees at Home, if either of those want to jump in.
That's an interesting question. For us, we just provide initial trainings for hosts about host expectations and what does it feel to have a stranger in your home, and just trying to do some preparation. Not more than that. I'm really interested to know which other organization that maybe we can signpost host to.
I'm AMNA, or formerly our Refugee Trauma Initiative, is providing, we provide introductory to safe spaces, kind of principles training. I'll put it in the link. I think we've got a training tomorrow. We do them approximately every 2 weeks. And what we go through is really thinking about trauma-informed care. And we've had hosts, mentors, people from organizations, local authorities join. It thinks about trauma, thinking about identity, expectations, you know, just some really simple practices for kind of grounding and regulation, both for hosts, but also, or for people attending, and for when you're interacting with displaced and refugee communities, and they're free to attend and drop in. So I'll put that in the chat now. And as I say, if the 2 dates on the website are full up, we will be putting a new date up in the next 2 days.
Can I just ask, what does everyone think about, for example, a weekly webinar that's open to all hosts, all potential hosts, all hosts? So we know that on a Monday evening at 7 o'clock, there's a 1-hour webinar on best practice as a host, taking into account all of the kinds of issues that have been raised today.
I think it would be brilliant. And if there was kind of a local authority and like trauma support available within those webinars for specific cases, because I think that is what will come out of it, is specific cases of either breakdown or near breakdown of successful hostings, that it could be really powerful to have all of those organizations convened there at once.
Right. Well, I think it's maybe if you think it's a good idea, I think that it would be a great outcome of coordination if we get a steering group of organizations who are interested in contributing to the webinars and contributing the content, contributing the presentation, let's get a steering group together so we can work together and create a joint initiative that offers this to the general, I'm talking about the general public. There's another one, Gabriella, there's another piece that is needed for organizations and for aid workers and volunteers in organizations. That's maybe a derivative of that, or the host one is a derivative of the second. But that's just something I wanted to get. Okay, so sorry, Rachel, you want to say something?
I mean, Tamara knows this, but just more broadly in terms of support. Yes to webinars. I think that's great. And at the moment, Sponsor Refugees, who represent community sponsorship for Citizens UK. So Citizens UK and Sponsor Refugees are hosting weekly sessions as of now. They're called Lunch and Learn. If you go on to is Tim still on the call? Perhaps Tim can chime in with who to email about this. But they're doing Friday lunchtime sessions for hosts, drop-in sessions. And then also I was thinking about training for hosts. Tamara, again, you know this because Tamara and I know each other through community sponsorship, but the trauma-informed information is obviously incredibly, well, it's essential. And at the same time, I think what community sponsorship groups are able to do, and I think they're probably going to be doing these a bit more sporadically, but I think there's room for a template. So maybe this is a reset suggestion, but a kind of an agreement, which is not a tenancy agreement because guests are not going to be paying rent, but an agreement around things like what time you want the door locked, if you know what don't you smoke in the house, if you smoke please you can smoke in the garden, stuff around all the things that we know we find annoying when we live with people. I've lived with good mates and we drive each other mad, you know, so it's just the day-to-day stuff as well, but having something written around agreements, the kitchen, who's cooking for whom, how does all of that work? I think I would advocate that, and I think I might talk to Reset about us framing one of those if there isn't one already.
Excellent.
I was going to say, just on the wider webinar group, it might also be, I've just lost my complete train of thought, but it might also be then useful to convene, what was I going to say, sorry, the local authority, that was it. So you could have kind of people coming in that breaks off from that. That wasn't my point. Come back to me. Wait, give me a minute. I'll
okay. Let me just bring in Johnny Levy, if you don't mind, Johnny. Just because you've been involved with community sponsorship and everything. Have you, in today's discussions, is there anything that's come out that you feel is a big hole in the system that we haven't covered?
No, I think it has been covered, but I think the big hole that everybody's referring to is information, is database, it's being coordinated, is not duplicating what someone else is doing, is how we access information on whatever it is. And somehow, if we could have, maybe involve the private sector, but to have a database that has all the information. The key information, of course, will be hosts, because we don't have that information. It's controlled by the government website. But everything else we could put together that people can then access whatever questions people are asking. There should be a place they can go to, and it's there. And if it's not there, then let's get it on there. And as you know, David, there was the paper put together by Reset, the toolkit, which I think is an excellent document which answers a lot of the questions of some of the things that people have asked today. And again, one can add to that. So I think that's the major message that I'm hearing coming out from what I'm listening to.
Right. Thanks, Johnny. And Anna's remembered.
I've remembered my point. Yes. Sorry. And then, so what I was saying was, I think with a webinar, it would be really useful to have the Ukrainian communities engaged as well. So particularly around the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and I mean, maybe longer term around just hosting in general with guests, but to have the kind of voice of those being hosted, and also the communities that already exist within the UK with which they, feel more comfortable. I do really resonate with the fact that so much of the focus, and I understand it in this today, is on the host side and is on the UK side, but I really see an Achilles heel with this scheme being successful in what's being provided to those who are currently fleeing, because like I totally understand the idea of putting agreements in place, and that those things need to be established, but also having spoken to so many of those fleeing, I can understand the hesitation to sign any requirement, you know, to have anything dictated. So I think there really needs to be the voice of those arriving in the UK come through with those webinars, and then also the voice of those communities who are already here, who maybe have resettled family members with them, so have a kind of understanding also what might go through that, because, you know, living with family is as challenging in many ways as living with strangers. So I think that would be great too.
Okay, well, Sarah has raised in the chat that should we be looking at the absence of fathers and older sons, but and if I can give the final word to Bishop Kenneth on the what you've just heard from Anna about the engagement of the Ukrainian community refugees in how we put across webinars, how we prepare hosts, and also if you've got some words for us on how we help women and children deal with the absence of their loved parents and husbands.
Thank you very much. This has been incredibly useful. All of these suggestions. I think that certainly a great resource for everyone in this would be to engage with their local association of Ukrainians in Great Britain. This is a powerful resource. We have people there in that organization who speak Ukrainian, Russian, and English, some of whom are recent arrivals, but many are also second generation people, which would understand the cultural nuances that are here in the United Kingdom that are perhaps not always visible in Central and Eastern Europe. I also think that, you know, one of the things that we can do with this hub that we're preparing is perhaps prepare for all of the organizations, NGOs, things that you may not know about Ukraine and Ukrainians for the hosts. I mean, I think one of the things that I've found somewhat surprising, but not really, is that Europeans didn't know about this huge country called Ukraine and where it was. Now everybody has heard of Kharkiv, Mariupol, Kyiv, and Lviv, etc. But what about, you know, the cultural, religious, ethnic nuances? That could be a very good thing, that a very little, small, not a 20-volume encyclopedia, but things you might want to know about the person that you're hosting. There's been so many ideas that have come to my mind hearing what everybody else is doing, that I think that that would be good for us to coordinate with and to supply people with. And I think that's one of the big contributions that could be made by the local Ukrainian communities. We have 27 branches of the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain. So it's pretty much where people will be coming to. You know, I think that maybe through David or somebody, we could be providing that type of assistance right away. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. And I see Sean Fluke of Camden has put a message to everyone. But Sean, I know you wanted to speak earlier. Just to give you a quick voice here.
Oh, thanks, David. It was merely to say what I've put in the chat, like thinking about what everyone's been saying about the hosts. We are where we are. This is a completely new thing that's happening here. But if this is something that's going to continue and maybe be expanded in the future for new groups of refugees, then it needs to be much more formalized and more kind of official and professionalized. I think because there's so much that we're saying that the hosts would need to absorb, and so much help that we can give them as well across the sectors. So I think some sort of accreditation scheme or something like that would make it a more professional kind of thing for people to do, and that would give more reassurance to refugees and so on going forward. So it's just like an idea for the future, maybe somehow these amazing people being accredited or being able to be accredited.
Excellent. Okay, so at this stage, we would normally put all the suggestions and the challenges, the recommendations, pull it all together and say, this is it, this is what's going to solve everything. Here we go, and let's present this to government. But I think there's been so much put on the table. I'm not even going to try and pull it all together with Anna. Now we've got it all documented. In the background, Dan, who is the coordinating the whole JRAN effort, has pulled it together, and we will we'll analyze it tomorrow. We'll bring some of the big points from the chat into it, and we'll let you have a concise as possible document that will be a summary of the proceedings, together with a recording of these, not the workshops, but of these plenary sessions, or the forum itself. So Dan, are you okay with that? Great. Okay, and Anna, last word from you, please, to wrap things up, because we're just after 6:30, and been a wonderful 2 hours.
Just to say thank you everyone for coming, and although it feels like a gargantuan task, I'm pleased to hear that the same concerns are echoed, and the same solutions seem to be coming up in a common theme as well. So I think it would be really useful to convene and also put some sort of visual thing together about resources available. But thank you for everyone for coming.
Okay, thanks all. We'll and have a good evening. Bye.